In the mid-19th century, the daguerreotype was not merely a photograph. It was called a mirror with a memory. The process involved polishing a sheet of silver-plated copper to a mirror finish, treating it with chemical fumes to make it light-sensitive, and exposing it in a camera for a length of time that could feel agonizing. The resulting image was not an imprint on paper, but a spectral, hauntingly detailed ghost held captive on the silver's surface. It was a perfect, permanent reflection, one that could be held, examined, and possessed. But the mirror, as occultists of the era warned, was a two-way device. It captured the living, but it also held the dead. And sometimes what it held was far more than just a memory. In 2004, an archival box was opened at the Boston Athenaeum, having been sealed in 1899. Inside was not a manuscript, but a single, heavy daguerreotype plate in a gutta-percha case. The image was dated 1853. It depicted a young girl, perhaps 9 years old, propped up on lace pillows in a four-poster bed. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded. It was unmistakably a post-mortem photograph, a common, if melancholy, practice of the time. But the archivists noted something deeply unsettling. The silver surface of the plate was tarnished in a way they had never seen before. Not with the usual black crawl of sulfur, but with a creeping, crystalline frost that seemed to emanate from the child's folded hands. And the child herself. Her expression was not one of peaceful repose. It was one of profound, calculating patience, as if she was not asleep but waiting. Image style, an authentic 1850s daguerreotype photograph, sepia-toned, scratched, faded, and with worn edges. The file contained only one other item, a coroner's inquest which listed the child's name as Elspeth Bleecker. Her cause of death was recorded as wasting fever. The entire Bleecker family, one of Boston's wealthiest, vanished from all records within a week of this photograph being taken. Their Beacon Hill mansion was found abandoned, its rooms left as if the occupants had stepped out for a moment and never returned. They and the man who took this photograph were never seen again. The house, the family, and their fortune were erased, leaving only this single silver mirror. Sound cue, a high, faint silver bell ringing once, then muffled. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? October 1853. Boston was a city of stark contradictions. On Beacon Hill, gas lamps illuminated cobblestone streets, casting a golden glow on the brick facades of shipping magnates and textile barons. Down by the docks, however, in the north end, the air was thick with the stench of low tide, coal smoke, and the unwashed masses spilling from overcrowded tenements. It was a city built on Puritan iron, but fueled by opium, rum, and the dark, cold money of the sea. Into this world stepped Mr. Aris Thorne, a man who believed in neither God nor ghosts, but in chemistry and light. Thorne was a daguerreotypist, an artist of the silver plate. He was a scientist, not a spiritualist. His studio on Tremont Row was a place of precision. He trafficked in truth, the sharp, unflinching detail that only silver and iodine could capture. He saw the world in monochrome, in chemical reactions, in exposure times. He despised the spiritualists and spirit photographers who were beginning to prey on the bereaved, using darkroom tricks to add ghostly smudges to their plates, claiming to have captured an echo of the soul. Thorne captured only reality. He was known for his clarity, his lack of sentimentality. It was this reputation, he assumed, that led to the summons. The note was delivered by a boy in livery, embossed with the crest of the Bleecker family. It requested his presence at their Beacon Hill mansion at his earliest convenience. The fee offered was exorbitant, enough to fund his studio for a year. The note specified only that he was to photograph a family matter, and that absolute discretion was required. Thorne packed his heavy box camera, his buffing sticks, his mercury bath, and his plates, assuming he was being called to document a wealthy patriarch on his deathbed, or perhaps a secret marriage. He had no idea he was walking into a house that was already a tomb. The Bleecker mansion on Mount Vernon Street was a fortress of old money. Its black, wrought-iron fences were sharpened to points, and the heavy oak door was opened by a butler who looked as pale and brittle as old parchment. The man, Bellows, did not meet Thorne's eye. He simply nodded and led him into the foyer. The house was suffocatingly quiet. Thick carpets drank the sound of their footsteps. The air was unnaturally cold, despite the season, and it carried a strange, coppery scent beneath the smell of beeswax and lemon oil. It was the smell of a freshly scoured sickroom. Thorne was shown into a receiving parlor where a fire guttered low in the hearth, offering no warmth. The room was dominated by heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the afternoon light. It was here he met Josiah Bleecker. The man was tall, imposing, dressed in immaculate black. His face looked like it had been carved from granite, all hard planes and deep shadows. He was a man who owned ships that crossed the globe, a man who dealt in commodities that built empires. He did not look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man preparing for a business transaction. "Mr. Thorne," Bleecker said, his voice a low rumble, "you are known for your discretion, and for your clarity I require a plate of my daughter." Thorne offered his condolences, a practiced neutral phrase. Bleecker waved it away as if swatting a fly. "We are not interested in sentiment, sir. We are interested in a record, a perfect final image. My wife, Eleonora, she requires it." As if summoned, a woman drifted into the room. Eleonora Bleecker was a wraith. She wore dark silk that rustled like dry leaves, and her eyes, wide and luminous, seemed fixed on something just over Thorne's shoulder. She clutched a small, silver bell in one hand, her knuckles white. "He must see her," she whispered, not to Thorne, but to her husband. "He must see what she has become." Josiah Bleecker nodded. "My daughter Elspeth passed this morning from a wasting fever. She is in her room. You will prepare your equipment there. You will capture one, and only one, perfect image." The journey to the third-floor nursery was a descent into the house's cold, silent heart. The butler, Bellows, led the way, his steps soundless on the runner. Aris Thorne followed, carrying his heavy rosewood camera and tripod. The coppery scent he had noticed downstairs was stronger here, mingling with something else, a faint, briny odor like seawater drying on old wood. It was inexplicable, this far up the hill, miles from the harbor. The nursery itself was a large, impeccably furnished room. A fire was lit, but the room was freezing. A deep, penetrating cold that settled in the bones. It seemed to emanate not from the windows, but from the massive four-poster bed that dominated the center of the room. This was where the child lay, Elspeth Bleecker. Thorne was a professional. He had taken post-mortem images before. It was a sad, necessary part of his trade, providing a final comfort to the bereaved. But as he approached the bed, his practiced composure faltered. The girl was arranged on a mountain of lace pillows. Her long, dark hair was brushed and spread perfectly around her face. She wore a white, high-collared nightgown. She looked like a doll, but it was her face that stopped him. The wasting fever had left no mark. Her skin was smooth, pale, and had a strange, damp sheen like polished alabaster. Her expression, it was not the peaceful slackness of death. Her lips were set in a faint, knowing smile, a look of quiet triumph. And her hands, folded neatly on her chest, were clutching a simple doll. Thorne began his work, his mind trying to focus on the science. He set up his camera, his tripod. He would need a long exposure. The room was dark, and the cold would slow the chemical reaction. He unboxed a silver plate, its surface polished to a perfect dark mirror. He would have to sensitize it out in the hall. "You will not fail," a voice said. Josiah Bleecker was standing in the doorway, his form a black silhouette against the hallway light. "My wife must have this image. It is essential." Thorne merely nodded, his throat tight. He looked back at the girl in the bed. For a second, under the flickering gaslight, he thought he saw one of her eyelids twitch. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, a symptom of his own unease. Thorne retreated to the adjoining washroom, which he had converted into a temporary darkroom. The space was small, windowless, and smelled of the pungent chemicals he carried. He lit his red safe light, the glow casting demonic shadows on the porcelain sink. He took the polished silver plate and opened his sensitizing box. The fumes of iodine and bromine rose, invisible but potent, staining the silver surface to a reactive, yellowish rose. This was the moment of potential, when the plate became a blank canvas, hungry for light. He returned to the nursery, slid the prepared plate into his camera, and aimed the lens at the child in the bed. Bleecker had not moved from the doorway. He was a sentinel, his presence a heavy weight in the freezing air. Eleonora, Thorne realized, was also there, huddled in a chair in the darkest corner of the room, rocking silently, the only sound the occasional, faint tink of the silver bell in her hand. "Hold still," Thorne said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud. It was a command he gave to the living, a reflex. He uncapped the lens. The long exposure began. The only sounds were the ticking of a mantel clock and the rhythmic, silent rocking of the mother. Thorne counted in high. As head, 1 minute, 2 minutes. The cold in the room was so intense his fingers ached. He felt a static charge in the air, making the hairs on his arms stand up. At 5 minutes, he capped the lens. He took the plate holder back to the darkroom. He placed the exposed plate over the mercury bath, heating it gently. This was the magic. The vapor would attach to the parts of the plate the light had touched, revealing the latent image. He watched, holding his breath. The image began to appear. The pillows. The bed frame, the child's hair, and then her face. Thorne felt a jolt of ice in his stomach. The plate was ruined. A massive, swirling fog like breath on a cold window obscured the entire center of the image, radiating from the child's chest. It was a chemical failure, a flaw in the plate or the preparation. But as he looked closer, the fog didn't look like fog at all. It looked like frost, crystalline, geometric patterns like ice forming on a pane of glass. He had never seen anything like it. He heard a sharp intake of breath behind him. Josiah Bleecker was at his shoulder. "It has failed," Bleecker stated. "Prepare another, you will not fail again." Aris Thorne was a man of science, and failure was an insult to his craft. He dismantled his process, searching for the error. Was it the cold? Had his chemicals been contaminated? He buffed a new plate with obsessive care, the chamois whispering over the silver. He resensitized it, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. He could not and would not be defeated by mere atmosphere. But as he prepared the second plate, a deeper, more primal anxiety had taken root. The pattern on the first plate? It was not random. He had seen it before. It was the structure of a snowflake magnified, a perfect hexagonal frost. This was not a chemical stain. It was an event. When he returned to the nursery, the scene had changed. Josiah Bleecker was no longer in the doorway. He was standing at the foot of the bed, his large hands resting on the mahogany footboard, his gaze fixed on his daughter's face. Eleonora was gone, though the faint ringing of her bell could be heard from a distant room, a nervous, agitated sound. "She is waiting for you," Bleecker said, his voice soft. It was more disturbing than his earlier command. "The light is fading, you must be quick." Thorne set his camera. He felt Bleecker's eyes on him, a physical pressure. He uncapped the lens for the second time. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the clock. 1 minute. Thorne's eyes darted from the camera to the child, to the father. 2 minutes. Bleecker had not moved. He hadn't blinked. He was watching his daughter with an intensity that was not grief, but a kind of hungry expectation. 5 minutes. The light in the room seemed to be visibly dimming, the gaslight flickering as if starved of air. 7 minutes. Thorne felt a sudden, irrational panic. He capped the lens. "I have it," he said, his voice hoarse. He quickly gathered his plate holder and retreated to the dark room, BJG Bleecker following him, crowding the small space. Thorne lit the lamp under the mercury. The tension was unbearable. The image must appear. He held the plate over the fumes. Slowly, the silver ghost emerged from the darkness. The pillows, the lace, the dark, spread-out hair, the folded hands, and the face. It was perfect, stunningly clear. Every detail was sharp, from the fibers of the nightgown to the faint, triumphant smile. "Yes," Bleecker whispered, a sound of profound satisfaction. "That is her." Thorne stared at the plate, his scientific mind reeling. It was the finest image he had ever captured. The clarity was impossible. But as he tilted the plate to fix the image, the mirrored surface caught his own reflection, and for a fraction of a second he saw himself, the lamp, and someone standing behind him. A tall, dark shadow in the room with him, its form indistinct, wet, and ancient. He spun around. Only Bleecker was there, his face a mask of triumph. A cold sweat broke on Thorne's brow, a stark contrast to the glacial air of the house. He quickly submerged the plate in the hyposulfite solution, fixing the image, making it permanent. The spectral form was now locked into the silver. He washed it, dried it, and placed it in the simple velvet-lined case Bleecker had provided. His hands were shaking. It was a trick of the light, he told himself. The mercury fumes, the stress, a reflection on the mirrored surface. But he could not shake the feeling of what he had seen. The shadow had not been Bleecker's, it had been taller, and it had seemed to drip. Bleecker took the cased image from him. He did not open it. He held it as one might hold a religious artifact, with a reverence that bordered on fear. He produced a leather pouch and dropped it on the porcelain sink. The sound of gold coins striking the basin was obscenely loud in the silence. "This concludes our business, Mr. Thorne," Bleecker said. His knee was final. "You will forget what you have seen in this house. You will forget the nature of this image. You will forget us." The command was absolute. Thorne, wanting nothing more than to be free of this house, this cold, this family, nodded quickly. He began to pack his equipment, his movements hurried, clumsy. He had left the first spoiled plate in the nursery. He turned to retrieve it. "Leave it," Bleecker commanded. "It is my property." Thorne didn't argue. He gathered his camera, his tripod, and his chemical boxes. The butler Bellows appeared as silently as he had before, ready to escort him out. As Thorne passed the nursery, he glanced inside. Bleecker was standing over the bed, holding the new daguerreotype open like a prayer book. He was showing the image to the child as if she could see it. "It is done, Elspeth," Thorne heard him whisper. "You are safe now. He cannot follow you." Thorne fled. He did not stop until he was back in his own studio, the door bolted, a fire roaring in his stove. He poured a stiff brandy, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep inside him. He had captured a perfect image, but he had also witnessed a ritual, and he could not escape the feeling that in that cold, dark room he had not been the only artist at work. For a week, Aris Thorne tried to bury the memory of the Bleecker mansion in his work. He photographed smiling children, stern merchants, and blushing brides. He lost himself in the predictable, comforting science of his chemicals. He scrubbed his studio as if trying to wash away the memory of the coppery, briny smell that still clung to his clothes, but the image haunted his sleep. The perfect, pale face of Elspeth Bleecker with her triumphant, knowing smile, the glacial cold of the room. The dark, dripping shadow he had seen, or thought he had seen, in the mirrored plate, and the father's words, "He cannot follow you." Who was he? And follow her where? Thorne was a man of logic. He tried to deconstruct the event. The cold, a drafty house in an October storm. The smell, faulty plumbing perhaps, or a symptom of the child's illness. The shadow, a simple optical illusion, a camera obscura effect from the lens, combined with mercury-induced nerves. He had almost convinced himself. He had almost filed the Bleeckers away as a strange but lucrative case of aristocratic eccentricity and grief. Then he read the newspaper. It was a small column in the Boston Daily Advertiser, buried in the shipping news. The Bleecker family's flagship, the Eleonora, had departed its berth 4 days prior, bound for the China trade. But it had left in the dead of night without a cleared manifest and in the heart of a northeaster. It was a reckless, almost suicidal move. More alarming was the society column. The Bleecker mansion on Beacon Hill, the paper noted, was shuttered. The servants had been dismissed, their wages paid in full with a massive bonus for their silence. The family, according to the paper's sources, had left the city indefinitely. A prominent family at the height of their power vanishes overnight. Thorne felt the cold return. This was not grief. This was flight. The silence from Beacon Hill was absolute. The Bleecker mansion stood dark, a missing tooth in the gaslit smile of the neighborhood. No smoke rose from its chimneys. No carriages stopped at its gate. The neighbors, Thorne learned from discreet inquiries at a local tavern, were relieved. They spoke in hushed tones of the change that had come over the house in the last few months. They spoke of the sounds. Not screams or arguments, but a low, resonant humming that seemed to come from the stones of the house itself, a sound that set their teeth on edge. They spoke of the cold that leached from the property, killing the immaculate gardens and frosting the iron fences, even on mild days. And they spoke of Eleonora Bleecker, who had been seen walking the widow's walk late at night, in her nightdress, ringing her small silver bell, not in madness, but as if warding something off. Thorne's professional pride was now eclipsed by a growing, gnawing dread. He was a man who captured truth, but the Bleecker family had shown him a truth he could not process. He felt like a loose thread in a tapestry he could not see. He was the only person left in Boston, it seemed, who had been inside that house in its final days. He was the only one who had seen the child's face. He was a witness. And what had Bleecker told him? "You will forget us." It was not a request. It was a threat. He found himself drawn, night after night, to the foot of Beacon Hill, staring up at the dark, oppressive silhouette of the mansion. He was a scientist, but the scientific method had failed him. He needed more data. He needed to understand the wasting fever that had claimed Elspeth Bleecker. He needed to find the he that Josiah Bleecker so feared. He began to trace the only thread he had, the dismissed servants. It took him 2 weeks and a significant portion of Bleecker's gold to find her. Her name was Mary, a young Irish girl who had served as a junior housemaid, and she was terrified. He found her not in the tenements of the North End, but in a small, clean room in Cambridge, paid for by the Bleeckers' silence money. She refused to speak to him at first, her eyes wide with a superstitious fear that was stronger than her loyalty to her former employers. It was only when Thorne produced the flawed daguerreotype plate, the one Bleecker had told him to leave behind, the one he had retrieved in his panicked haste, swapping it for a blank, that she finally broke. He had kept it, this flawed mirror, this first failed attempt. He showed it to her. The swirling, crystalline frost that obscured the child's form. Mary crossed herself, stumbling back. "Mother of God," she whispered. "It's the cold. You've trapped the cold." She agreed to talk, but not in the house. They walked along the banks of the Charles River, the gray water a churning, icy soup. "It wasn't a fever," Mary said, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the water. "Not like any fever I've ever seen. It began when the master returned from his last voyage from China or somewhere worse." She described Elspeth's illness. It had started not with heat, but with a chill, a damp coldness that no fire could touch. The child, once bright and lively, had become quiet, secretive, and pale. She complained that her blood felt like slush. She had developed an intense, unnatural thirst, but she wouldn't drink water. She craved salt. Mary had caught her more than once, sneaking spoonfuls of coarse salt from the kitchen and later drinking from the finger bowls which were filled with brine. Her skin took on a damp, pearlescent sheen, and her dark hair, once fine, had become coarse and heavy, always seeming wet, no matter how often it was dried. "She changed," Mary whispered, pulling her shawl tighter, though the day was not cold. "The mistress, Mrs. Bleecker, she saw it. She was terrified. She tried to get the child to pray, to go to church, but Elspeth..." She wouldn't go near the church. She said the bells were too loud, that they hurt her. The girl began to spend all her time in her room. She refused to see her playmates. She would sit for hours by the window, staring out toward the harbor, which was not visible from that side of the house. Yet she claimed she could smell the tide. She also began to speak of a friend. At first, Mary and the other servants thought it was an imaginary comfort for a lonely, sick child, but the descriptions became more disturbing. The friend was tall and wet. He came in the night, she said, not through the door, but through the walls. He was very old and very sad, and he missed the sea. The child's relationship with this friend was complex. She seemed to fear him, yet she also seemed to revere him. It was this friend who told her to drink the salt. It was this friend who promised her she would never be cold again because she would become the cold. The silver bell, the one Eleonora clutched, had been Elspeth's. The child had begun ringing it incessantly, claiming the clear, high-pitched sound kept the friend from coming too close. But in the last week, she had stopped ringing it. She had dropped it on the floor and refused to touch it. She said he didn't like it, Mary said, her voice cracking. She said she liked the friend now, that he was showing her the deep. The master, Mr. Bleecker. He wasn't trying to cure her, he was encouraging it. He would lock himself in the room with her for hours. When he emerged, his face would be pale, but his eyes would be burning with a terrible, ecstatic light. It was after one of these long sessions that Mrs. Bleecker had dismissed all the servants, giving them their money and telling them to flee Boston, to never speak the name Bleecker again. Aris Thorne left the housemaid by the river, his mind a whirlwind of impossible data. A man of science had to find a rational explanation. The child was clearly mad, a victim of some unknown neurological ailment, the father a fanatic, the mother broken by grief. The friend was a delusion, the salt craving a bizarre medical symptom, and yet, the briny smell in the house, the unnatural cold, the frost on the daguerreotype plate. His scientific certainty was fracturing. He turned his investigation to the man at the center of the mystery, Josiah Bleecker. He was not just a merchant, he was a king. His ships, the Golden Mean, the Sea Star, and the Eleonora, were the fastest in the Atlantic. He traded in tea, silk, and porcelain, but Thorne, digging through shipping ledgers and dockside gossip, found rumors of a different cargo. Bleecker was known for making runs to places other merchants avoided. Remote islands in the Pacific, uncharted coastlines in South America. He was rumored to be involved in blackbirding, the slave trade, or more likely, the highly profitable and highly illegal opium trade. But the rumors Thorne uncovered were stranger still. He wasn't trading in human misery, but in something far older. He was known among certain shadowed circles as a collector, not of art, but of artifacts. Idols, manuscripts, and relics plundered from coastal temples and forgotten shipwrecks. He wasn't just a merchant, he was a desecrator. His last voyage, the one Mary had mentioned, had been to the icy, storm-racked waters of the North Atlantic near Greenland. He had been searching for the lost colony, he claimed. But he had returned with only one item in his personal cargo. A crate, long and heavy, that was offloaded in the dead of night and taken directly to the Beacon Hill mansion. The crew of that voyage had been paid double, and none of them had sailed with Bleecker again. Thorne's investigation had not gone unnoticed. He returned to his studio late one evening after a long day spent poring over maritime maps to find the lock on his door broken. He stepped inside, his heart pounding. The room was a disaster. His chemicals were shattered, his backdrops torn, his carefully organized plates smashed to the floor. It was an act of pure, violent destruction, but it was not a robbery. His money box was untouched. His expensive silver lensing equipment was left. The intruder had been searching for something specific. Thorne rushed to his darkroom, to the hidden floorboard where he kept his savings and his most private documents. It was torn open, and it was empty. The flawed daguerreotype of Elspeth Bleecker, the one with the crystalline frost, was gone. The intruder had taken the one piece of evidence that proved the events in that house were real. Thorne felt a surge of cold, sharp fear. This was not the act of a common thief. This was the Bleecker family's reach, or that of their associates, extending back into Boston to clean up the last remaining thread. They had not just fled, they had covered their tracks, and Aris Thorne was the last track. He realized with dawning horror that Bleecker had not told him to leave the flawed plate out of arrogance. He had known Thorne would be unable to resist taking it. He had wanted Thorne to have it, to study it, to be drawn into the mystery. Why? Was it a trap, or was it a message? He was now part of the story, whether he wanted to be or not. His studio, his sanctuary of science and light, had been violated, and he was exposed. He knew too much. And the people he knew it about were not just a missing family. They were part of something powerful and something that did not tolerate witnesses. The loss of the plate was a blow, but Thorne's mind, trained for meticulous detail, had memorized its every flaw, the frost pattern. He had called it hexagonal, like a snowflake, but that wasn't quite right. He sat in his wrecked studio, the smell of spilled chemicals stinging his eyes, and sketched the pattern from memory. It was not the delicate, airy structure of snow. It was harder, more geometric. It was the structure of salt. It was a salt crystal, magnified 1,000 times, radiating from the child's chest. The wasting fever, the cold, the slush, the thirst. It was not a fever, it was a crystallization, the briny smell in the house, the child drinking brine. It was a metamorphosis. His mind, clinging to logic, searched for a parallel. He found it in his own chemistry. What did he use to fix his images, to make them permanent, to stop them from changing? Hyposulfite, a salt solution. Bleecker hadn't just wanted a memory of his daughter. He had wanted to fix her, to stop the transformation, or perhaps to complete it. He remembered Bleecker's words as he showed the final, perfect image to the dead child. "You are safe now. He cannot follow you." The photograph wasn't a memory. It was a cage, a silver mirrored cage to hold her soul, keeping her safe from the friend who had come from the sea. But what if he had it backwards? What if the photo wasn't meant to keep the friend out? What if it was meant to lock Elspeth in so that what she was becoming could not escape? The flawed plate, the one that was stolen, had shown the process in motion, the crystallization. The perfect plate, what had it truly captured? He had seen it for only a moment. But he remembered the clarity, the impossible, perfect clarity, and the faint, triumphant smile. Thorne knew he had to abandon his studio. He was being hunted. He packed a small bag, his remaining gold and his knowledge. He had one last place to investigate before he, too, vanished. The Bleecker family's church. If Josiah was a fanatic and Eleonora a devout, broken woman, their conflict might have left an echo in the church's records. He went to the Old North Church, not as a parishioner, but as a researcher. The church rector, a weary man who had seen too much of Boston's hypocrisy, remembered the Bleeckers. He remembered Eleonora. A fragile soul, the rector said, stirring tea in his cold office. Married to a man of immense appetites. Josiah Bleecker had not attended services in years. He called himself a deist, but I fear his God was found in his ledgers. Eleonora, however, had been a faithful, if terrified, attendee until a few months ago. She stopped coming, but she sent donations, large ones, and with them she sent letters, confessions, I suppose. I tried to visit her, but the butler always turned me away, claiming the house was under quarantine. The rector hesitated, then made a decision. He unlocked a drawer and produced a small, leather-bound book. "This is not a church document. It was left in the collection plate 2 months ago. It is Mrs. Bleecker's private diary. I have held it in confidence, not knowing what to do. Perhaps you can make sense of it." Thorne's hands trembled as he took the book. It was damp to the touch, and the silver clasp was tarnished with a familiar, briny corrosion. He opened it. The first half was the mundane, unhappy record of a wealthy, lonely woman. The second half, beginning 6 months ago, was a descent into pure, unadulterated terror. The diary entries, written in a frantic, spidery hand, chronicled the return of Josiah Bleecker from his North Atlantic voyage. April 14th, Josiah returned. He is changed. The sea has entered him. His eyes are bright but cold. He speaks of a great discovery in the ice, not gold, but a promise. He brought a crate to the house, forbade me to see it. He has placed it in Elspeth's room. He says it is a font of strength, an heirloom of the deep. I am afraid. Thorne read on, his blood turning to ice. Eleonora described the artifact. It was not a crate. It was what was in the crate, a mirror, but not of glass or silver. It was a slab of what looked like black, volcanic glass, polished to a perfect, dark sheen. It was cold to the touch, even in front of a fire, and it seemed to absorb the light in the room. Bleecker had hung it on the wall in Elspeth's nursery, opposite her bed. April 20th. Elspeth is fascinated by the dark mirror. Josiah encourages her to sit before it, to commune with it. He says it will make her strong, worthy of his legacy. I see her reflection in it. But it is not her. It moves when she is still. It smiles when she is solemn. I tried to cover it, but Josiah struck me. He has never struck me before. The diary detailed Elspeth's sickness, the cold, the thirst for salt, the withdrawal, and the smell. May 11th. The smell of the sea is in the house. Bellows cannot scrub it away. It comes from Elspeth's room. It comes from the mirror. Josiah is thrilled. He says the change is beginning. He says our line will be purified and made permanent. He speaks of an order he has joined, the order of the deeper him. They do not worship God. They worship what God abandoned at the bottom of the sea. Eleonora's terror escalated into a desperate fight for her daughter's soul. She placed crucifixes in the room. They tarnished overnight. She sprinkled holy water. It froze on the floorboards. The silver bell, Thorne realized, was her last desperate defense. It had been a gift from her own mother, blessed at her baptism. June 4th, the bell. The sound of the silver bell agitates the mirror. When I ring it, the reflection stills. Elspeth screams. She screams that I am hurting the glass. She begs me to stop. Josiah has forbidden me from ringing it. He says I am interfering with the transfiguration. I am a prisoner in my own home. My husband is a monster. My daughter is becoming a thing. The diary entries became shorter, more frantic. Elspeth's transformation was accelerating. She had stopped eating solid food. She would only drink water into which Josiah had stirred handfuls of sea salt. Her skin, Eleonora wrote, had become smooth and hard, and her eyes were changing, the pupils widening until they were almost entirely black. She no longer slept. She sat awake in her bed all night, every night, staring at the dark mirror, and she was humming. A low, resonant, droning sound that Eleonora said she could feel in her teeth. It was the same sound the neighbors had reported. September 1st. He came, the friend. I saw him. I woke. And he was in the room, standing over Elspeth's bed. He was not a reflection. He was. Leaking from the mirror, he was tall, made of shadow and seawater and ice. He had no face, only a light, a cold blue light deep within. He turned. He saw me. Josiah was on his knees, bowing. Elspeth was, smiling at it. I ran. I locked my door. I have been ringing the bell for 3 days. I cannot stop. If I stop, he will find me. Thorne closed the diary. He was shaking. This was not madness. This was a detailed, corroborated account of an event. The housemaid's testimony, the neighbor's complaints, the impossible frost on his own daguerreotype, it all fit. He was no longer a scientist investigating a mystery. He was an antiquarian who had stumbled into a war. The wasting fever was a lie. The wasting was a replacement. Elspeth Bleecker was being consumed or colonized by an entity summoned from the dark mirror. The entity that Josiah Bleecker in his arrogance had welcomed. He, a member of the Order of the Deeper Hymn, had sought to infuse his bloodline with the power of this thing. He had sacrificed his own daughter to it. Thorne's mind raced. The timeline. The housemaid said Elspeth had stopped ringing the bell in the final week. She had welcomed the friend. The entity had won. So, what had happened on October 14th, the day Thorne was summoned? Elspeth was in the bed. She was dead. The coroner's report said wasting fever. But Mary had said Josiah was encouraging the change. Why would he grieve? Why would he want a post-mortem photograph? Unless he hadn't won. Something had gone wrong. Thorne looked back at the last entry in Eleonora's diary. October 13th. The humming has stopped. The house is silent. Elspeth. She is cold, not the chill from before, but a true final cold. She is still. Josiah is broken, not in grief, but in rage. He locked himself in the nursery. He says the vessel was impure, that I ruined it with my prayers and my fear. He says the friend rejected the offering. Elspeth is dead, my baby is dead, and he is angry. He has summoned a photographer. He says he must seal the vessel before the friend realizes its mistake and tries to reclaim the damaged goods. I do not understand. I only know that I am glad she is free. I am glad she is dead. The revelation struck Thorne with the force of a physical blow. Josiah Bleecker was not a grieving father. He was a failed alchemist, a high priest whose sacrifice had been rejected. The entity from the mirror, the friend, had been invited into Elspeth, but her mother's desperate spiritual resistance, the bell, the prayers, had somehow spoiled the process. The entity had recoiled, abandoning the child's body, leaving her a dead, empty husk. But Bleecker, in his fanaticism, feared the entity would return. He feared it would reanimate the body, or that the spirit of his daughter, now trapped between worlds, would be taken as a consolation prize. The photograph, the mirror with a memory. It was exactly what Thorne had first suspected, but for a different reason. It was a trap, a cage. Bleecker, a member of an occult order, would know the lore. The silver plate, a mirror, could capture a spirit. He wasn't trying to cage the entity. He was trying to cage his daughter's soul, to seal the vessel and hide her from the friend she had first welcomed and who now wanted her back. This was the ritual Thorne had interrupted. The first photo failed because the lingering cold of the entity, the frost, was still too strong, obscuring the image. The second, perfect photo, it had worked. It had captured her. It had sealed Elspeth Bleecker's ghost inside a mirror of silver. And Bleecker's words, "He cannot follow you." He had been speaking to his daughter's spirit, assuring her that she was now safe from the friend, locked away where it could not find her. But Bleecker had made a terrible miscalculation. He had locked his daughter's soul in a portable, indestructible cage. And then he had taken that cage and the dark mirror that was the entity's doorway onto a ship. He had put both on the water. Thorne now understood the family's flight. Josiah Bleecker had failed his order. He had failed the entity he worshipped. He had lost his daughter, and he had a spoiled vessel on his hands. He was fleeing the order who would see his failure as heresy, fleeing the city which was now a tomb, and perhaps fleeing the friend itself which he had summoned and could not control. He had taken the two most dangerous objects in his possession with him, the dark mirror and the daguerreotype of his daughter. The Eleonora was not a trade vessel. It was an escape pod, and it was heading straight into the domain of the very thing he feared. Thorne realized his own danger was now twofold. The Order of the Deeper Hymn had ransacked his studio looking for the flawed plate. They were cleaning up Bleecker's mess, erasing every trace of his failure. This meant they were still in Boston. They were active, and they knew who he was, but there was a second, more metaphysical danger. He had seen the entity. In the reflection of the second plate, he had been a witness not just to the family's secret, but to the entity's existence. He, too, was a loose thread. He had to disappear. He gathered the diary and his gold. He would not go south. He would go north into the cold, away from the sea. But first, one last stop. He had to see the house. He had to see the room where the dark mirror had hung. He had to know if Bleecker had, in his haste, left the doorway open. Thorne moved through the streets of Boston like a ghost. T himself sticking to the shadows, his face obscured by his hat. He reached the Bleecker mansion well after midnight. The street was empty. The iron gate was latched but not locked. He slipped through, the hinges groaning softly. The silence of the property was heavy, oppressive. He made his way to a rear entrance, a servant's door. The lock was simple. Within a minute he was inside, enveloped in the house's absolute frigid darkness. The air was stale, but the coppery, briny smell was gone. The cold, however, remained. It was a dead, static cold, no longer radiating but settled in the very bones of the house. He lit a small candle, its flame sputtering as if in a vacuum. The house was just as the papers had said, abandoned. Furniture was draped in dust cloths. A wine glass half full sat on a table. It was a scene of sudden, interrupted life. He made his way to the third floor, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. He reached the nursery. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was stripped to the mattress. The furniture was gone, but Thorne's eyes were drawn to the wall opposite where the bed had been. There was a large, rectangular discoloration on the wallpaper, a place where the gaslight had not faded the pattern. It was the exact size and shape of a large mirror. The dark mirror, the artifact, was gone. Bleecker had taken it with him. Thorne felt a wave of relief. The doorway was closed. But as he turned to leave, his candle flame illuminated something on the floor, glinting in the corner. He bent to retrieve it. It was the small, silver bell, Elspeth's bell. He picked it up. It was ice cold, and the silver was tarnished black. He instinctively shook it. It made no sound. The clapper was frozen in place, encased in a small, perfect crystal of sea salt. He stood in that dead, cold room, holding the silent bell. The implications were chilling. Eleonora had dropped it, or Elspeth had, and in their flight it had been forgotten. But it had frozen, solid. The entity's cold had lingered here, long and powerful enough to silence the one thing that could fight it. He was standing in a room that had been a battlefield, and he was holding a casualty of the war. He pocketed the bell, a cold weight against his chest. He had to leave. He fled the house, locking the servant's door behind him, and did not look back. He made his way to the North Station, where he bought a ticket on the first train heading inland to Vermont. He would change his name, build a new life, and bury Aris Thorne, the daguerreotypist, along with the Bleecker family. He would be a man of science no longer. He had seen what lay just beneath the thin veneer of reality in the cold, dark places. He had seen the truth in the silver mirror. And the truth was that science was a flickering candle in an infinite ancient darkness. For years, he lived in a small town near the Canadian border, working as a pharmacist, a man of chemicals once more, but of a different, more predictable kind. He never spoke of Boston. He never touched a camera again. He kept Eleonora Bleecker's diary and the frozen silver bell locked in a small iron box. He told himself the story was over. The Bleeckers were gone. The Eleonora had been declared lost at sea, vanished in the northeaster, taking its dark cargo and its caged soul to the bottom of the ocean. The Order of the Deeper Hymn, it seemed, had forgotten him. He had survived. He had escaped. But the sea does not forget, and a mirror holds its memory forever. Years later, in 1875, a package arrived at his pharmacy. It was water-damaged, wrapped in oilcloth, and bore no return address. Inside was a single, recent copy of the Boston Daily Advertiser. A small article was circled in red ink. It described how wreckage, identified by its markings, had washed ashore on the coast of Newfoundland. It was from the Eleonora, lost 22 years prior. The sea, in its slow, cold rhythm, had finally given up its dead. But that was not all. The article mentioned a ship's log found in a sealed, watertight cask, its pages preserved. Thorne read the account, and the cold he had felt in the Bleecker house returned, a cold that would never leave him. The log was kept by the first mate, a man named Hezekiah. The first week of the voyage was normal, though the crew was unsettled by the captain's strange behavior. Bleecker, his wife, and a small, pale child he claimed was his daughter remained locked in the master cabin. They took no air. They ate no food. The only order Bleecker gave was for 3 buckets of seawater, fresh from the side, to be delivered to his door each morning. The crew thought him mad. Then the storm hit. A monster of a northeaster, the one that had supposedly sunk the ship. The Eleonora was battered, its masts cracked. But according to Hezekiah, it was not the storm that doomed them. It was what was in the cabin. The first mate's final entry was dated October 29th, 1853, 2 weeks. After they had fled Boston, the storm was raging, the ship was taking on water, but the crew was not fighting the sea. They were huddled in the forecastle, paralyzed by terror. "The storm is a beast," Hezekiah wrote, his hand shaking so badly the words were nearly illegible. "But the true storm is below, the captain. He is not in his cabin, he is outside. I saw him, standing on the prow in the teeth of the gale, laughing. He is not wearing oilskins, he is in his shirt sleeves, and he is not wet. The spray, it freezes as it nears him. He is covered in a sheen of ice. He is humming the same terrible, low sound we have heard from his cabin for a week." The log detailed the full horror. 2 nights before, Bleecker had emerged. His skin was pale, his eyes black. He had thrown the ship's cook overboard for failing to bring the salt. He had taken control of the ship, but he was not steering it away from the storm, but into its heart. Eleonora was gone. Hezekiah speculated she had thrown herself overboard days earlier. And the child? We hear it over the wind from the captain's cabin, a bell, a small silver bell ringing, and we hear her, the child. She is singing in there, a song with no words. It sounds like the ice, the captain. He is not steering the ship. He is waiting. He is calling something from the deep. The friend he screams about. He says the offering is pure now. He says the storm is the doorway. God help us. The humming is. The ship is humming now, the wood, the ice. It is all one song. I hear it. Oh God, I hear it. The log ended there. The page was stained with seawater. Thorne dropped the paper. Bleecker hadn't been fleeing the entity. He had been joining it, the failed ritual. It hadn't been a failure. It was just the first step. Thorne finally understood. The rejection Eleonora wrote of was not a rejection. It was a test. The entity was testing Bleecker's faith, and Bleecker in his fanaticism had proven his devotion. He had sacrificed his wife's sanity, his daughter's life, and now his own ship and crew. The Eleonora was not an escape. It was a pilgrimage to the heart of the storm, a final offering. The daguerreotype. His mind snagged on the detail. The perfect silver plate. Had Bleecker taken it with him? Had he offered his daughter's caged soul to the entity as a gift? Or had Eleonora, in a final act of desperate maternal love, stolen it from her husband and cast it into the sea, hoping to free her daughter, only to have it sink to the bottom, still trapped? And the child? The log said the child was singing. Had the entity returned? Had it reanimated the spoiled vessel after all? Or was the caged spirit in the daguerreotype, now in the possession of the entity at the bottom of the sea, being forced to sing? The questions formed an icy knot in Thorne's stomach. He looked at the newspaper again. The package had been sent from Newfoundland. Someone there had found the log, read it, and known to send it to him. He had changed his name, his life, but he had been found. The Order of the Deeper Hymn had not forgotten him. They had been watching him for 22 years. This was not a warning. It was a summons. They were letting him know that the story was not over. They were showing him the final chapter. Aris Thorne, now an old man named Elias Thorne, did not flee this time. Where could he go? He sat in his pharmacy, the silent, frozen bell on the counter in front of him, and waited. The next package arrived 3 days later. It was not a newspaper. It was a heavy wooden box, black with age and water, bearing the same salt-tarnished hardware he remembered from his own camera case. It was a daguerreotype case, but it was not his. It was the one Bleecker had provided. The one that held the perfect image. He knew with a certainty that defied all logic that this was the plate. The one that had been at the bottom of the North Atlantic for over 2 decades on a ship with a crew that had been driven mad. It had been found in the wreckage, and the Order had sent it to him. He was the last witness. This was his reward or his curse. His hands, now wrinkled and spotted with liver flaws, trembled as he fumbled with the clasp. It was rusted shut, sealed with corrosion. He had to use a small hammer to break it open. The case sprang apart. He looked. And the science of his mind, the logic, the disbelief, it all shattered into a million pieces like a mirror dropped on stone. It was Elspeth Bleecker, but she was not in the bed. The photograph was not the one he had taken. It was, and it wasn't. The room was the same, the lace pillows, the headboard, but the child was not lying down. She was sitting up. Her long dark hair, which had been spread neatly, was now floating as if she were underwater. And her eyes were wide open. They were pure, solid black, and she was smiling, not the faint, triumphant smile he remembered. This was a wide, ecstatic T. Arable grinned. Thorne fell back, gasping, the daguerreotype clattering to the floor. He scrambled away from it, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was impossible. The daguerreotype process was permanent. It was fixed in silver. It could not change. He had taken an image of a dead child lying down, her eyes closed. This was an image of something awake, something risen. He stared at it from across the room. The silver plate gleaming in the lamplight seemed to pulse with a cold, blue light, the same light Hezekiah had described in the ship's log. The image was a lie, or it was a new truth. Had the plate been with Bleecker in the cabin? Had the entity's proximity, the ritual in the storm, altered the mirror with a memory? Had it developed like a photograph into a new, more terrible image? Or had he, Aris Thorne, been blind? Had he been so focused on the chemical perfection that he had failed to see the spiritual reality? Had Elspeth been awake the entire time, her eyes open, and his camera, his science, had only been ableist to capture the lie of her death? While the silver, the mirror, had captured the truth of her transformation, he crawled forward, unable to look away. He picked up the plate. He looked into the black, smiling eyes of the child, and he saw recognition. The thing in the photograph was looking at him. He heard a sound, a high, clear, single tink. He looked down, the silver bell on his counter. The clapper had broken free. A single drop of water of brine dripped from it onto the wood. The house, his pharmacy, was suddenly, impossibly cold. Cold was not a memory, it was real. A glacial frost was spreading from the daguerreotype in his hand, numbing his fingers, crawling up his arm. The image on the plate was vibrating. The smiling face of Elspeth Bleecker began to blur as if the silver were liquefying. The low, resonant hum he had read about in Eleonora's diary. He could hear it. It was inside his head. It was the sound of the deep, cold, crushing dark. He realized, with the last shred of his scientific mind, what was happening. The mirror. Bleecker had used the photo to cage his daughter's spirit, but the entity, the friend, had found its prize at the bottom of the sea. It had taken the cage, and over 2 decades it had worked on it. It had corrupted the silver prison. It had turned the cage into a door, the same way the dark mirror in the nursery had been a door. And the order of the deeper him had sent this active, open doorway to him, the last witness. It was not a summons, it was an offering. He was the final sacrifice. He tried to throw the plate, but his hand was frozen to it. The frost was covering his arm, his chest, a beautiful, crystalline prison. He could smell the salt, the brine, the copper. He looked back at the plate. Elspeth was gone. The image was no longer of a child in a room. It was only a swirling, cold, black depth. And from that depth, a cold, blue light was rising. It was the friend. The he that Bleecker had feared, and it was coming for him. When the neighbors found Aris Thorne a week later, he was sitting in his chair, his pharmacy pristine. He was frozen solid. The coroner, a man of modern science in 1875, was baffled. It was summer. There was no ice. Yet Mr. Thorne was frozen as if he had died at the Arctic Circle. His face was a mask of terror, his eyes wide, fixed on something he alone could see. The cause of death was listed as heart failure brought on by sudden, inexplicable shock. The authorities cataloged his meager possessions. They found a small iron box. Inside, they found a strange, damp diary and a blackened silver bell. Of the daguerreotype, there was no sign. It had vanished, along with whatever had come through it. The pharmacy was sold. The items were auctioned. The diary and the bell eventually made their way through a series of private collectors, deemed curiosities, their terrible meaning lost. They were separated, their context erased, until the diary eventually found its way to a university archive, and the bell to a maritime museum where it sits today, labeled simply, Silver Bell C-1840, recovered from Bleecker-associated wreckage. The order of the deeper him had closed its loop. All witnesses were silenced. All evidence was scattered. The Bleecker name was nothing but a footnote in the shipping ledgers of a forgotten Boston. The story, it seemed, was finally and completely over. But a mirror, once it holds a memory, holds it forever. In 2004, at the Boston Athenaeum, an archivist opening a sealed box found a daguerreotype. It was not the changed plate. It was not the perfect plate that had been lost at sea. It was the first one. The spoiled plate, the one Aris Thorne thought had been stolen from his studio, but the order had not taken it. They had, it seems, missed one. Or perhaps they had left it for someone to find generations later. A seed, a new invitation, Th. Archivist catalogued it. Daguerreotype 1853, post-mortem of unknown child, attributed to Bleecker estate, plate damage, severe chemical fogging or frost. The plate was put into climate-controlled storage. A high-resolution scan was taken, and it is in this scan that the true horror lies. When the image is digitized, the contrast enhanced, the fog can be analyzed. It is not random. It is a perfect, repeating, crystalline pattern. And deep within the frost, just over the child's chest, if you look closely enough, you can see a shape. It is not a shadow. It is not a reflection. It is a face. It is gaunt, ancient, and eyeless, and it is looking directly at the camera, directly at Aris Thorne, directly at you. The Bleecker mansion itself was torn down in 1899, the same year the daguerreotype was sealed and given to the Athenaeum. The developer who bought the lot, a man named Silas Croft, intended to build a modern, luxury apartment building. The demolition crews reported strange accidents, tools vanishing, ropes snapping, and the persistent, pervasive cold even in July. They had to wear heavy coats as they tore down the third floor nursery. When they reached the foundation, they found something that halted the work. The cellar, which should have been brick and earth, had been changed. The stone was not granite. It was a black, oily, volcanic rock that did not match any local geology. It was the same rock Eleonora had described, the dark mirror. It was not in the house. It was the house. Bleecker hadn't just brought back an artifact. He had built his home on top of it. He had laid his foundation on a doorway to the deep. The Order of the Deeper Hymn was not just a parlor room occultist club. They were architects. They were building something, beacons, anchors, for their friend. The developer, Silas Croft, went bankrupt. The project was abandoned. The Bleecker lot remained empty, a gaping hole on Beacon Hill for another 50 years, known only as the Croft Folly. No one would build there. The ground, they said, was sour. The story of the Bleeckers became a ghost story, a piece of dark Boston folklore whispered by tour guides. They tell of the vanished magnate and the mansion of ice. But they don't know the truth. They don't know about the order or the mirror or the entity, and they don't know about the photographs. There were 3. The first, flawed plate, which sits in an archive, holding the image of the entity in its frost. The second, perfect plate, the one that changed, the one that became a doorway and killed Aris Thorne. Its location is unknown. It was taken from his pharmacy, presumably by the Order. It is perhaps still in their possession, a weapon, a relic. And then there is the third. Thorne, in his haste, in his scientific pride, had prepared 2 plates for his second attempt in case the camera or chemical bath failed. He had exposed the first. He had seen it was perfect. He had never used the other prepared plate. It, too, had been left behind in the nursery, sensitized and ready in the dark. It had sat there in the cold for hours as Bleecker performed his ritual, as Eleonora descended into madness, as the entity's power filled the room. That plate, forgotten by all, was eventually found by the servants cleaning out the house. It was just a blank, fogged piece of silver. It was sold for scrap, but a sensitized plate left in a room saturated with such energy would not remain blank. It, too, would have captured an image, not one of light, but one of presence. What memory did that mirror capture? What ghost is locked inside that lost, discarded piece of silver? The nature of a mirror is to reflect. The daguerreotype, a silver mirror, reflects what is placed before it. Aris Thorne believed he was capturing the image of a dead child. But the Bleecker house was a place where all reflections were distorted. Josiah Bleecker looked at his daughter and saw a vessel for an ancient god. Eleonora Bleecker looked at her child and saw a monster from a dark mirror. And Elspeth, what did she see? She saw a friend who promised to end her loneliness, to make her powerful, to make her permanent. The camera, Thorne's instrument of science, captured a different truth with every attempt. The first plate captured the process, the cold, the crystallization, the entity's presence. The second captured the result, the triumphant, risen, and terrible new being, and the flawed plate, the one that remains in the archive. It serves as a warning. It is a photograph not of a person, but of a place. A place where the boundaries between our world and the next are not just thin, but have been deliberately and successfully torn open. The Bleecker family did not just vanish. They crossed over, and the photograph that remains is not a memory. It is a map. It is an invitation. It is a doorway, still waiting, cold and patient, for someone with the right eyes to look deep enough. If you want more dark historical stories like this, subscribe to Macabre Mysteries of America and keep the past from being erased.